Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode where we take deep theological truths and break them down so we can really grasp them simple, clear, and biblical. I'm your friend, Dr. James. Today is actually very special because we are kicking off a brand new two-part series on a topic that I know confuses a lot of us. We hear it all the time in church, in prayer circles, even in our own internal monologue, the will of God. Now, before we dive in, I want to give credit where credit is due. The material we are going to walk through today comes from the lectures and research of Dr. Ken Wilson. Okay, let's get into it. If you've been following theological discussions, you know we often talk about the sovereignty of God. We look at how that affects our salvation, soteriology, how we view Scripture, and how we interpret the Bible. But one of the biggest hurdles we face is this concept of the will of God. Usually, the default setting in a lot of minds, especially coming from a Stoic, Augustinian, or Calvinist perspective, is that the will of God is immutable, meaning it must happen. The logic goes, because God is sovereign and because He is omnipotent, anything He pleases will absolutely 100% occur. And because of that rigid view of sovereignty, theologians have had to do some mental gymnastics. They've arbitrarily divided God's will into two categories to explain why bad things happen or why people sin. You've probably heard this, right? They say there is the perfect will of God and the permissive will of God. The idea is that the perfect will is what God really wants, and the permissive will is what He just allows to happen. But friends, there is a problem with that kind of thinking. We need to stop and ask, is that actually what the Bible teaches? Or is that a philosophical framework imposed on the text? We need to delve into Scripture to find the truth. Is it the will of God as a fixed force? Or is it simply what God wills, what He desires? Let's start with the definition of the word will. If you open Webster's dictionary, it defines will as the faculty of conscious and particularly of deliberate action. It talks about the power of choosing, volition. And then, further down the list, definition number 10 says to wish or desire. And definition 14 says to decide or determine. Now pay attention here. The dictionary lumps all of that under one word, will. But those last two concepts are radically different. Think about it. To wish or desire is very different from to decide, purpose, or determine. If I wish or desire something to happen versus I purpose and determine that it will happen, those are two completely different realities. Yet in English, we use the word will for both. And here is a challenge for you. The idea of a faculty of will, like a willer inside you that causes you to act. You actually can't find that in Scripture. That is a Stoic concept. The Bible doesn't talk about a willer mechanism. It talks about actions, wishing, desiring, purposing, determining. So, to understand the Bible, we have to redefine our terms. We have to separate desire from determination. Let's look at the Greek, because the New Testament wasn't written in English. If you go to the Englishman's Greek-English concordance, you'll see there isn't just one word for will. There are two main word groups. One is boul or boulomai. The other is thelēma or telo. Let's break these down because this changes everything. First, let's look at boul or boulomai. This word is used 7 times in the New Testament, places like Luke 14, John 12, Acts 5. If you study those 7 instances, the meaning is clear. It means to determine, to decide, or to purpose. It's not, I kind of hope this happens. No, in those contexts, it is determined. The noun form is used of Joseph of Arimathea. It says he was a counselor. But if we stick to the meaning of boulē, it implies he was an honorable decision maker. He was a leader in Israel who helped determine things. Dr. Wilson points out that if you look at all 34 times boulomai and its group are used, the context always points to a plan, a purpose, or a determination. Now, let's look at the other word, thelēma or telo. This one is used way more often. Matthew 6, Ephesians, Luke, 1 Thessalonians, it's everywhere. So what does thelēma mean? It means desire. Here's the illustration Dr. Wilson uses, and I love this because it's so relatable. I can say, I will or desire to eat a whole half-gallon of Bluebell ice cream. That is my Thelēma, my desire, but I am not going to do it. Why? Because it's bad for my weight. So, even though I have the desire, Thelēma, I have not purposed Boulē to do it. Do you see the difference? I Thelēma the ice cream, but I have not Boulē the ice cream. I haven't planned or determined to eat it. In the New Testament, Thelēma, desire, is used of God 32 times. But Boulē, the determined plan, is rarely used of God. That is a massive distinction. God has many desires, Thelēma, but simply because God desires something doesn't mean He has planned or determined Boulē that it must happen. Even the lexicons, the dictionaries of Greek, admit this, though sometimes they confuse it. BDAG, which is the gold standard lexicon, defines Boulē as a plan, purpose, intention, resolution, or decision. It's about a course of action. But for Thelēma, BDAG says it is what one wishes to happen, the act of desiring, taking pleasure in. Notice what is missing from Thelēma. There is no plan. There is no determining force. The same thing happens in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Boulē is decision, deliberation, deep thinking. Thelēma is being favorably disposed, desiring earnestly. So whenever you see the will of God in your English Bible, you have to ask, is this His plan, Boulē? Or is this His desire, Thelēma? Because will is just a catch-all English word that hides the meaning. Now, let's apply this to a heavy-hitter passage, Romans 9. This is the chapter that people usually go to for that strict deterministic sovereignty. Let's read verse 18 and 19. In most translations, it says, "So then He has mercy on whomever He wills, and He hardens whomever He wills. You will say to me then, why does He still find fault? For who can resist His will?" It uses the word will 3 times there. It sounds like the same word, right? But let's look at the Greek. So then He has mercy on whomever He thelē, desires, and He hardens whomever He thelē, desires. That's desire. But then the question comes in verse 19. For who can resist His Boulē? Who can resist His plan? His purpose? That is a huge difference. The text is actually saying God shows mercy to whom He desires, and He hardens whom He desires. But the objector asks, who can resist His determined plan? If you don't distinguish between desire and plan, you miss the entire argument of the text. So, how did we get so confused? Why do we just say will for everything? Well, we can blame the Latin. When Augustine was reading Romans 9, he was reading it in Latin. And in Latin, the word is voluntas or volo. The problem is, in Latin, volo means to will, wish, desire, determine, purpose, and plan. It's one word that smashes everything together. Greek separates them. Thelēma, desire, versus boulē, plan. Latin combines them, voluntas. So when the theology was being developed in the Latin-speaking West, they lost the nuance. They treated God's desire and God's determined plan as the exact same thing. And that is where the idea of this immutable, Stoic will of God came from. If the Latin Vulgate had been more precise, they could have used desiderat for desire and propositum for plan, but they didn't. They used the same word. So as we wrap up this first part, I want us to really sit with this. The will of God is not always a determined script that must happen. The Boulē of God is His determined plan. That happens. The Thelēma of God is His desire. And guess what? God's desires don't always happen. How do I know that? Because of Jesus. Remember when Jesus looked over Jerusalem, He wept and said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." That wanted, that was the Thelēma. That was the heart of God. It was His desire to save them and hold them, but it was not His Boulē. It was not His determined plan to force them because He gave them the freedom to choose, but you were not willing. This distinction saves us from a lot of bad theology. That is where we are going to pause for today. We've laid the groundwork: Boulē versus Thelēma, plan versus desire. In part 2, we are going to go even deeper into how this plays out in our lives and how we understand God's guidance. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening. If this was helpful, share it with a friend who might be struggling with the concept of God's will. I'm Dr. James, reminding you to keep seeking the truth in love and in grace. God bless.